basically, Cyrus Wheelock leaves the gun with Smith, and there's another derringer that's involved that is given to Hiram, Joseph Smith's brother. And as they were there in the jail, they were waiting, for this thing to all be settled. And there's another section in Joseph Smith's story where he talks about how they were, had a very heavy spirit. I mean, it was probably a very depressing time for them because they know the situation does not look very good for them. And so they order some wine to be brought to the jail. And Smith admits that this wine was not for sacrament purposes, but that it was to relieve their spirits, and so it was actually meant to, I guess, to be somewhat intoxicating, to make them feel better, which is kind of odd because Mormons aren't supposed to drink alcoholic beverages, but yet it seems perfectly okay for Joseph Smith to do that. Eventually, the jail is approached by a mob. How many are in the mob, we really don't know. Again, the numbers fluctuate. Some say as many as 200 people, were involved in this mob. And a group of men go up the stairs towards the upstairs room where Joseph Smith was being held, and they're rushing the door. Now, you have to understand the jail cell that Joseph Smith was in did not have bars on it. It had merely a door, and the door didn't even latch. It was warped, and the lock didn't really even work. So I remember the first time that I went to the Carthage jail was back in the 1980s, and we had a tour guide by the name of Elder Salt from Salt Lake City. I mean, it's hard to forget that name. And I remember Elder Salt telling us the story of how the only defense that Joseph Smith and the others that were in the jail cell with him had was by holding themselves against the door and fighting off their attackers with their walking sticks. And he repeats this, 3 times. The only defense they had was by holding themselves against the door and fighting off their attackers with their walking sticks. And after telling this very emotional story, and we were the only non-Mormons there, and the rest of the people in there were all a group from BYU. That was a busload of BYU students that had just been dropped off. And so while he tells this story and he bears his testimony to the truthfulness of it, and of course there's this resounding amen, and then he says, "Are there any questions?" So I raise my hand, and I says, "You'd mentioned 3 times that the only defense that Joseph Smith and the others had was by holding themselves against the door and fighting off their attackers with their walking sticks." I said, "But I remember reading in Volume 7, page 101 to 103 of the Documentary History of the Church that Joseph Smith had a smuggled pistol, and that he used that pistol to shoot 3 people, 2 of whom died." And it was interesting because you could hear, it was like the proverbial tabernacle tour. You could hear a pin drop. It was dead silence. And I'll never forget, Elder Salt, the tour guide, put his arms behind his back. He rocked on his heels, looking at the floor, and he said, "Yes, there was a gun." And he proceeded to also mention the derringer that Hiram had that I did not bring up. It made me wonder, this man gave this emphatic story that the only defense Joseph Smith had and the others in the jail was by holding themselves against the door, fighting off their attackers with their walking sticks. Yet all the time, this man knew he had a smuggled pistol. He didn't deny the fact that Joseph Smith fired the pistol, but he did say, "We don't know where the bullets went." To which I said, "Well, John Taylor seemed to know. He said that he shot 3 people, 2 of whom died. Obviously, we know at least 3 of the bullets went into somebody." Of course, he didn't really want to readily admit to that part of the story, but he did know that there was a gun. But at the same time, he kept insisting that the only defense was holding themselves against the door, which now we know, and he was admitting, was not the case. That I found very disconcerting. Every time I go and I visit the Carthage jail, like I say, I've never heard them bring up the gun. One time I asked one of our tour guides, "Wasn't there a smuggled pistol?" She said, "Well, it wasn't smuggled, it was brought in." What does that mean? Was it legal at that time to bring guns in to prisoners? I mean, come on, this is silly. What kind of an answer is that? But they will not tell you anything about this. The last time I went to Carthage, we had a sister missionary, and she also failed to mention the gun. I had a long discussion with her afterwards, and she knew all about it. She knew all about the gun. She probably had done more homework on the story than I've seen many tour guides at Carthage jail. But yet, she wasn't about to divulge that part of the story, mainly because it didn't make Joseph Smith look very heroic, I guess. The fact is, Smith did have a gun. According to John Taylor, he shot 3 people, 2 of whom died. John Taylor never changed his story. He stuck with that story, as far as I know, till the day he died. You'll still find it written in various accounts. The Comprehensive History of the Church, I think, also mentions this account, as well as the documentary history of the church. After Joseph Smith, the way we get to that part of him using the gun is while they are holding themselves against the door, which they really did do. So the tour guide, Elder Salt, was correct. They were holding themselves against the door. There's no doubt about it. But while they're doing that, one of the people attacking the jail fires a shot through the door. The bullet penetrates Hiram's face about near the bridge of the nose. And Joseph Smith, or Hiram Smith, falls back. And according to the account, he makes some statement like, "I am a dead man." Now, first of all, he's just got a musket ball into his brain. I mean, is he really going to be thinking of words like, "I am a dead man"? Is this really what happened, or is this, again, just Mormon folklore? The way the story goes, Joseph Smith goes to the aid of his fallen brother and says something to the effect, "Oh, my dear brother Hiram." Did Joseph Smith really say that? It sounds a little cheesy to me. I mean, it's not something that I would probably think if it was my brother. But nonetheless, he sees his brother who's dying here, who's probably dead at the time. And so at that time, according to John Taylor's account, Joseph Smith grabs the pistol that's in his pants pocket, and he sticks his arm through the door and fires off these 3 rounds. And so this is where he shoots them. Joseph Smith afterwards realizes that this is pretty much a lost cause, so he's going to try to escape going out the window. Now you have to understand, this jail is pretty thick. You know, I forget exactly how thick the walls are, but you have to basically go up on a ledge to get to the window. And when he goes to the window, there's a mob. Part of the mob is waiting outside for him, and they're firing through the glass, and Smith is hit by the bullets. I think he was hit 4 times. Once in the chest, a couple times in the back, and I can't remember where the other bullet went. But nonetheless, he's fired upon by the mob outside, and he falls out the window, and he dies. What's interesting about all this is when I was at the Carthage jail the first time, back in the 1980s, I knew that there was a blood stain that was on the floor. And I knew also that there used to be a glass frame that covered the blood stain. I knew this for a fact because I'd actually seen pictures of it, and we have a picture of it on our website. I learned this through some friends of ours, of my wife and I, who had gone to the Carthage jail back in the 60s when this frame was still in place. And they were told at the time that it was covering the blood of Joseph Smith. Okay. Now, anybody who knows the history of this story would know that that could not have been the blood of Joseph Smith. The blood happened to be around 6 or 7 feet away from the door, about the length of a man. So when you think about it, that was probably the blood of Hiram. That was in the wood and wouldn't come out. The blood soaked into I think the floor was made of an oak, and so it stained the floor. When I went and asked about the blood stain, of course there was no frame on the ground to even know where it was, but Elder Salt knew about it, and he pointed it out to me. It happened to be in between 2 benches, so you would have walked right on top of it without even knowing it was there. And he pointed it out to me and told me that that was the sacred blood of Hiram. That would make more sense, that would be Hiram's blood, because if he was shot near the door and he fell back, that's probably about where his head would have been. Joseph Smith, it could not have been his blood because he was shot over by the window. There's no way that much blood would get over, so many feet away. It was impossible. It wouldn't have happened. But that was the story that I was given. Now you don't even know about the blood stain. They don't even talk about the blood stain. But I had an interesting talk with a sister missionary this last time, and she knew about the blood stain. She told me, and I haven't verified the story, but she told me that it was Spencer Kimball, President Spencer Kimball, who tried to make a concerted effort to get rid of the blood stain. But it's still there. You can still faintly see the outline of the blood stain in the ground, in the floor, but they just don't talk about it.